So, do you want to start by telling us? Well, actually, I'll talk about how I came to find you. I've been following you for such a long time, and then I think it must have been last May you posted a video about your birth, and I thought this is just
Uh-huh.
brilliant timing because whilst I can talk about different types of modalities and talk people through it, it's really not the same as hearing that heartfelt, this is my story, which I think is going to be so helpful for some people to sort of talk through the, well, not so much the like looking down on it, but this is what I felt, this is what I experienced, this is what I remember happening at the time versus what's happening now, and this is how I kind of got myself through it. So wherever you want to start the chain in the unraveling of that, I'm waiting with bated breath. I can't wait to hear this story.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm more than happy to share my story as we're gonna call it a birth trauma survivor. Um, and also because I'm working with women who have gone through birth trauma and helping them, I can share both sides, right? The side of me as a client, as someone who's healing from it, and also as someone who is helping others to heal. It's like two sides of the story there.
So
And
powerful.
yeah, yeah, it's been a beautiful journey. It's been hard, like the birth itself. Um, and I had lots of symptoms of birth trauma that usually we would not, name as such.
No.
But one of the most typical symptoms after we've gone through trauma is anger. We just feel angry a lot,
Yeah.
right? And that can be taken onto our children or onto our spouse or onto the people around us. And I remember being really, really triggered by people telling me, so you're going to have another one? I remember especially a man like, come on, you go have another one. And I got into such anger, and I could not name that to him because it was just a little pat on the back, like, come on girl, have another one, and then he left. But I got so angry, thinking, gosh, he has no freaking idea about
Yeah.
what it is to give birth, about what it is to go through trauma. And basically you're telling me, go be traumatized again, right? This is really how it felt inside of me. I was so angry. I wrote a letter that I never posted. I wanted to post it on my Facebook wall, but I did not. But there was that huge amount of fight inside of me, right? And yeah, sometimes we take it over, on our children, because in a way, to our body, they're the responsibles for that, right? For the
And I
trauma.
love that you've gone straight there because it's often the thing that people are tentative to talk about or we don't talk about because of all the bigger cultural issues
The
around
taboo.
women and anger
Yeah.
and how dare you be mad at your baby and all of that. So I love that you've just gone straight there. Thank you for giving us all
No,
that permission.
yeah. Birth trauma is really affecting the way we attach to our children, right? Um, there can be a lot of resentment towards our baby, towards our child.
Absolutely.
It can be disgust, right? I've had many moms coming to me saying, I'm just disgusted about my child, right? And disgust is a very strong emotion that the body, because I'm working with somatic experiencing, right? So I'm working with the healing from the body. And disgust is something that is coming very strongly when something wrong happened to us, to our body, right? It's that sense of like, yuck, bleh, right? It didn't feel right, right? And that often is felt towards our children. And there's so much shame, as you said, right, about feeling that. But I really want all our listeners to know that it is normal, right?
Absolutely.
It is it's a bodily reaction of something has happened to me that felt really wrong, that was very, disgusting in a
And
way.
I would say even that can begin way before birth. If you've had, I mean, I had pretty bad hyperemesis in both of my pregnancies. I spent a lot of my pregnancies vomiting and feeling really, really
Oh
ill.
yeah.
So even those early beginnings of, oh, yay, pregnant. Oh my God, I actually feel like I want to die and I'm not even sure. And
Yeah.
again, the disgust, the resentment, all of that building in, it just makes perfect sense
Yeah.
because your body is no longer your own.
Yeah. No, that's right. I also remember suffering from terrible thoughts of my baby dying, or people coming to attack me, or kidnap my baby. And again, that's something that many mothers go through. Thoughts that are really intense. And again, that's a signal that our physiology, our nervous system is still holding onto the fight or flight that came up to be mobilized during the birth as a way to protect us, right? And that fight or flight hasn't completed, it hasn't released, so it's still there in our body. And when our system, when inside of our body, we're feeding into that fight or flight, our thoughts are very intense, negative, angry, right? So again, I want all the mamas out there to know that it's not that it's something that is actually going to happen. The thought is not real. It's a reflection of how the system inside, how the body inside hasn't healed, hasn't come back to regulation and to feeling stable and grounded again, right? So that's another symptom of birth trauma that I could feel myself, and I see my clients battling with too. Yeah. I think we should talk also about postnatal depression, right? Because that's a big one, and it's also related to birth trauma, right?
Very much so.
Yeah, yeah. And it can be just that the birth itself was traumatic, but it can also be that in the past, when we were kids or teenagers, or sometimes in our life, we went through a trauma, which is often something like sexual abuse, that is being triggered again when we are giving birth, right?
So true for so many people.
So many of us.
Even the ones who say, it's not relevant, I'm all done with that, I'm all good. You just never know what the body is going to remind you of at any given time.
That's right. And we can feel like we're fine, in quotes, most of our time, but then we give birth and our whole system goes back to that time when we were abused, and it's triggering all that stuff that was left unresolved and it was just in a part of our system kind of dormant, right? So we still could function, we felt normal, and the birth has re-triggered that, right? And that is often part of the healing work of working on both the initial trauma, the sexual abuse, and the birth, because they're very similar, right? And I'm happy to work to talk more about that. But to come back to postnatal depression, we know that within the somatic healing world, that depression is not, it's not just in our head. It's not just us making up, sad thoughts. It's a signal that our bodies went into a freeze response, right? And the freeze is that reaction that our nervous system has when things become too much, when things are too overwhelming. And in order to protect us, to not feel all the overwhelm of all the pain, then we go into a freeze, we go into a bit of a shutdown, right? And the freeze response is also what mammals, because they have a very similar nervous system than us, it's what they go through if they get attacked, right? If a possum gets attacked by, I don't say a wolf, I don't know if they live in the same part of the world, but just to take an example. if the possum gets attacked by the wolf, the possum will go into a freeze response. It will go limp or stiff, right? His system kind of shuts down to numb him, so he doesn't feel the pain. And the freeze response is, we have that too as humans. And when things are becoming too big, when we go through something traumatic, like birth can be, our system can go into a freeze response too. Just like too much of that fight or flight that is not going anywhere, because I can't defend myself, I can't say what I want to say, I can't move in the way I want to move. Too much, I go into a freeze, right? And the freeze, when we're in that chronic freeze, it feels like we're exhausted. And I remember that very much, like just being with my daughter all day long was exhausting. Hanging the washing felt like too much. We feel unmotivated. We feel like the world would be better without us. We've got very negative thoughts where we're in freeze, because it's a death preparation kind of state at the physiological level, right? So we've got those thoughts of, oh, my baby would better be without me, or the world is a dark place, or I was not meant to be a mom, or I'm a terrible mom, right? And again, these thoughts they're not true. They're a reflection of what is happening inside of us, right? So that's what depression, postnatal depression is. It's that freeze response acting as a lead to contain all the fight or flight that was mobilized during the birth, that could not complete. And it's absolutely exhausting to contain all that fight or flight, right? And when we come out of freeze, that's when we contact the fight or flight. So we go from being unmotivated, depressed, to yelling at our kids or being triggered. And many of us are oscillating between being shut down, depressed, unable to play, to being angry, yelling at our kids. And then because that feels too much, we go back to the freeze again.
Especially now, even if you've got nothing even in your periphery that you think resembles a traumatic birth or postnatal depression, I think anyone who's a parent is stuck very much in those two oscillating
Absolutely.
at the moment.
And that's very much a signal of unresolved trauma, right? So that's something that I want all your listeners to know, that it's a symptom. It's something that we can heal. It's something that can change. It doesn't need to be like that forever. Peter Levine, who's the creator of somatic experiencing, says that trauma is a fact of life. We all go through trauma or traumas in our life, but it doesn't need to be a life sentence.
No,
we don't need to be to have the symptoms our whole life. We can heal from them.
And so much teaching and so much growth and so much strength to be found.
Empowerment. It's and I really, to come back to my story, I really relate to that, as the more I've healed, as a whole, my whole system, but also healed from my traumatic birth with my daughter, the more I felt able to be with her, to just sit and be with her, to be comfortable, just being present without, thinking of what I need to make for dinner and, the whole list, or wanting to run away. And right,
yes,
we can all relate to that, right? And as I found more regulation in my system and I've healed from that, I've just been much more able to be with her. And my attachment with her is getting stronger and stronger every time. And I can see how she's loving it, having me being able to connect more with her, and she can feel the healing through herself and through our connection. It's really beautiful.
It's a next level that I think doesn't get talked about much either. We talk a lot about the birthing person and how they're going and how we're going to get them to a state of, well, there is no going back, but almost that, post-traumatic growth, but that next stage of, the flow-on effect to everybody else, who's in that picture. Mm.
Yes, it's quite amazing. It's quite amazing. It really affects positively our whole family, because, you know, when we are oscillating between shutdown and anger all day long, it doesn't it doesn't feel good to anyone who's around us, right? Our husband and our children. So yes, it's a huge relief for everyone when we heal.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
much so much amazing, like things that seem like, how am I ever going to get through this? How am I ever going to feel good again? I think being in that position where you are at the other side now, you get to gently lead other people back.
That's
which is
right.
why I'm so excited that we get to talk to you, because someone is going to be going, maybe if she can do it, I can do it too.
That's right. That's
do
right.
you want to give us the sort of overall skeleton story of what birth looked like for you, in as much as is comfortable, but also mindful of, it's not so much in the details, it's how you felt about it. But do you want to just talk us through the sort of overall, what was birth like? What was particularly challenging? What did you feel like you did well? Any of that kind of whatever's coming up.
Okay. The birth of my daughter was quite long. It was 25 hours long. And it was planned as a home birth. But yeah, after 19 or 20 hours of not really, I'm gonna say going anywhere, but I could feel that it was happening. But I think the midwives were just like, no, it's not, it's not happening fast enough. Or so they asked me to go to the hospital to give birth, which in the moment didn't feel right at all. I remember being really angry, being betrayed. Like, hold on, we're gonna do that together, right? It's we said this is what's gonna happen, and I feel really betrayed. And you know, as soon as I got to the hospital, I was, 40 minutes later, I gave birth. I think the trip in the ambulance over the bumpy roads of where I used to live helped to move things around. And really, I wish that my midwife had done that with me, had put me up and asked me to move, and help that going forwards. But I was also in a lot of pain. I was exhausted. I could not have, I was not eating for like a day and a half after 20 hours of
that's intense.
Giving birth. And then I had to give birth. Well, I remember the obstetrician coming in the room and say, okay, I'm going to put a monitor on your baby's head. And I was like, no, you're not doing that. Like, go away. And I don't remember exactly how I worded it or how they worded it for me, but basically I felt like, no, you go for a walk and you let me do that with the midwife. And the midwife did stand up for me, which was really great, saying, no, we'll be all right. Just come back in a bit. And I did it, and I gave birth. I was on my back and I had terrible tearing. My baby had a huge head. And so lots of bleeding. So then I had to go to theater and get the stitches, which that was also very traumatic, because I did everything without drugs until they had to stitch me, right?
Me too, twice. So they're kind of like, every time I think about it or someone talks about stitching, I notice like I just cross my legs.
Yes.
It's still like a,
yeah. And it's very interesting you say that, because that's one of the symptoms I had after the birth. My left leg, I used to be a gymnast and a dancer, and I could do like 180 splits. I was very flexible. But after the birth of my daughter, my left leg could not open more than 90 degrees. I could feel that there was a tendon between going from the inside of my knee to my pelvic floor that was so tense that if I was to open my leg a bit more, it would pop, like it would break, it would snap. right? That was
Wow.
very intense. That was a horrible feeling for someone who's always been, dancing and moving, to not be able to do a simple cartwheel or just sitting normally with.
I love how you say that. I'm like, just a simple cartwheel.
Well, because it was simple before the birth to me, right?
I get it, but it's still just like, oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah, no, it was it was horrible to not be able to move my body as much. And for a long time I thought maybe they stitched me wrong. And I remember having a student there as a doctor and someone teaching her. I was like, what the fuck, right? This is just so horrible. It's like, I'm not a guinea pig for you to learn, sorry, but it felt really wrong. So I thought, well, maybe she's, took a bit too much of the muscles or but what I realized in all the somatic experiencing healing that I've done is that there was a movement that my body wanted to do with my legs that it couldn't do, which is exactly what you said before. It's like closing them, closing my legs. I didn't want to have someone going with a needle between my legs, right?
No.
Right?
Everything in your brain will try to protect you from doing that.
Exactly, right? So your body is feeling that, but you're under anesthesia, so you can't do it. And that's the fight or flight that I was talking about before. There's something that wants to happen, there's a movement that wants to happen, but it cannot happen because I was under anesthesia, right? And it's true also when we're not under anesthesia, but we know we have to stay in some position, or we don't want to upset anyone, so we close our mouths, right? And I've had a couple of sessions like that where I actually let my body close the legs. And then I could feel all sorts of sensations in that tendon between my knee and my pelvic floor, like if it was redoing itself, making there's lots of tingling. I could see it as it's hard to find words for it. It was incredible. There's just sensations there in that tendon that felt like something was happening, something was releasing, something was creating more elasticity in it again. And while it's not perfect and I can't do as big splits as I could, I have recovered so much from those sessions 4 or 5 years later. Right? And I had tried everything. I had tried Pilates and stretching every day for a minute or 2 minutes, right? I had done all the physical stuff, but that was not physical. That was my body still trying to complete that. Oh no, you're not going to go between my legs. I'm going to close that leg. Right? That was very powerful.
I think it's for people who are listening who are resonating with any of that, and it might not be that particular area in your body, but it's probably a good time to just check in for anyone who's driving in their car or listening to that or whatever they're doing around, and just check in with any feelings that you're feeling, note them.
Yeah.
We'll
the body will communicate to you what is left unresolved, what is missing, where is the work. Yeah. And that's why I love somatic experiencing, because we're really asking the body, like something has happened, and what was missing there? How can we help complete that was left incomplete? Because this is what trauma is, right?
So for people who are curious, wondering, what does a session look like? How is it different to doing other types of modalities? Can you talk us through anything that's useful?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Somatic experiencing is mind-body kind of therapy. So we're working with the brain and with the body, with the nervous system. And basically we're listening to what the body wants to say, right? And the body has the mind and body has 5 main ways to talk or to communicate to us. And Peter Levine called that the SIBAM. It stands for SIBAM, which is sensation, images, behavior, affect, and meaning. So we are listening to the body and see what comes up. There could be sensations. So they could be like, oh, my heartbeat is going faster, or there's a clenching in my belly, or I feel even a bit nauseous, or I feel tingling in my hands, or heat or cold, right? These are all sensations. They're all saying something. It's the body trying to process something from the inside, right? Images can be a memory. It can be, oh yes, I remember being in, in that room giving birth. Or it can be the image of, oh yeah, I feel strong, and now the image of a tree is coming to me with strong roots, and right, it can be really anything. Behavior will be a movement, right? It can be like we're working with the traumatic birth, and suddenly the client, as he's talking or as she's talking about it, would do movements of like pushing away, say, I didn't want those doctors here, and their hands are pushing air, right? And this is a movement that is very important. It's a boundary movement, right? The hands are saying, go away, give me that space, right? And we want to work with that movement, because that is something that was not possible during the birth, but that wants to be completed now, right? So that's an example of a movement. Affect is another word for emotions. So there would be, fear, sadness, anger, joy, excitement, grief. And the M is for meaning, right? So the more psychological part of it, or the bigger meaning of being healed, right? And so we're listening to that. We're asking, when the body's going through its own process, if there is an image that comes up, or if there's a movement that wants to happen, and we're kind of guiding the client's body to complete what was left incomplete, to receive what it didn't receive, to slow things down. That's a big thing in birth when we're being rushed, or, because we need to respect a schedule. Slow everything down, right? We can help the client to just recreate a birth experience through all these channels. How does it feel like? How does it look like? What is your body wanting to do, right? And it's, in somatic experiencing sessions, touch can be very healing. But we can also do that without touch. And at the moment, all of us, because of the coronavirus, we're all working online, and it's also very, very powerful. So we are talking, we are listening to the body, we're giving the nervous system the time it needs to heal and to integrate the healing that is done. We're listening, we're allowing space for emotions. Yeah, that's how sessions look like. And there will be, we never know before session how it's going to go, right? Because we're just opening the space for the body to bring up what it's ready to heal. So you can rarely do, okay, we're gonna have 5 sessions to heal you from your birth. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah,
it's there will be some groundwork to do first, so the client knows how to self-regulate, and the body will bring up what it's ready to heal from at each session, and that will be a little bit each time, right?
okay.
Yeah. And I might have done 5 sessions myself specifically around my birth trauma, but over 2 years of fortnightly sessions, healing sessions.
Because I think sometimes different things come up at different times, and I think the children being the beautiful mirror for some of those things. I wonder, it might be actually useful to talk about some of that too, in terms of for the person who said, okay, I've done some of this work on myself. However, the anger, the resentment, the I'm just sick of you, go away type things that come up for parents. Can we talk through some of that too, for people who are maybe at that, like, well, I'm not really sure, because I hear this a lot too, oh, I feel like I've kind of, resolved that. It's not so much the birth anymore. It might be that next stage of, well, now I have a toddler, and now I have a preschooler, and now
that's
it's
right.
like,
And our children are wonderful at pointing out to us what is the next piece of healing we need to do, because they can feel when we're triggered or when we're a bit wobbly, and they will keep pushing there for us to resolve it until we resolve it. Right? So yes, I mean, I remember my daughter healing from her own birth as I was healing from her birth myself. Right? It was quite amazing to see the parallel, because as I was more able to be with her birth story and to be with her, then her little body was able to bring more of her own healing too. Yeah. And I remember her playing, and I'm mentioning that because I'm sure some parents will relate to that, playing a game of, I'm going to start at the beginning. When she was about 1.5 or 2, I've asked her, because she was always kicking her blankets off at night. She could not keep her blankets on. Right? Even in the middle of her sleep, even fully asleep, she would kick her blankets off. And I've asked her, you don't like being in the blanket? And she just had the first few words, and she said, no. I said, why you don't like being in the blanket? She said, bit stuck. I was like, interesting. She was very much stuck during the birth. She was in the birth canal for like 4 hours. So there's definitely, I think she had an elbow up or something, because I could feel it in my belly. It was very sharp in one side. I was like, whoa, that's interesting. She's a bit stuck. And so I don't remember if I've initiated that or she did. I think she did. She put a caterpillar toy she had, a wooden caterpillar, in the blanket. And that caterpillar had a long string, there are those toys you can roll on the ground. And she would put it in the blanket, and then she would pull the caterpillar out. So, oh, the caterpillar is out. And she would do that again and again and again and again. I was like, wow, that looks like a birth experience of being there stuck in the blanket and then coming out. And then she put herself in the blanket. She put herself in the blanket and asked me to wrap her tight. Right? And then she would wriggle herself out of the blanket. And we would celebrate that. Whoa, you've made it. You came out of the blanket, right? Yeah. And we did that. I remember both my partner and I with her for 40 minutes nonstop. That same thing of her being stuck in the blanket, wrapped, and then successfully coming out, right? Which is what did not happen in the birth, right? She was really stuck there. She did come out eventually. But that's an example, and I went on a tangent there, but that's an example of how children will naturally heal from their own birth as we are doing our own work. Right?
That's
and
interesting.
They will do that through
that's interesting.
play. They can do that, through a tunnel, especially children who have gone through, were born through a C-section. They would be quite scared of going through a tunnel. And part of the birth healing for them would be to, little by little, without pushing them, but inviting to go through a little tunnel at first, and then a bigger one, and a bigger one, and let them play through that. They will do their own healing with us just being there and holding that space for them. And it's really magical. And after that game that my daughter did with the blankets, since then, she's been able to sleep in a blanket when she never did for the first 2 years of her life.
It's so funny you mention that, because even as you're talking, I'm just thinking, yes, I have one of those too. Mine, shoulder dystocia baby, who, that was, she was pulled out. She hates blankets. She was always that child who hated being swaddled, was not interested in it, and is very much I want to do it myself. And she will do things like wrap a baby but it's got to be right. It's got to be like just right. So I think for her, yeah, I'm definitely identifying with the like, didn't get to come out on her own terms. And I think sometimes she gets very frustrated with the like, yeah, that wasn't on my terms. So
yes.
And I have another child who was induced, came out very, very fast, and she is someone who does not like to be rushed. Or she does not like to be rushed. So it's interesting as you're talking about that. I'm like, it's interesting thinking about those things, I suppose, that we can put down to is, oh, that's a quirk. That it's like, oh, isn't that interesting? How interesting.
The way they are born can affect them for their whole life in a good way and in a negative way too, right? It's their first experience out in the world, you know. And that is something as well that I've healed myself recently, because I was, as a baby myself, I was in the incubator for the first 3 days of my life. And that, again, this kind of separation from the mother is quite, can be quite traumatic, right, for both, right? And what came up in my own healing is that, you know, I had the message very early that there was no one there for me, right? That I could scream or call and no one would come because I had to stay in that box, in the incubator, right? And I am someone who has been very much like that. Like, I don't need anyone, can do it all by myself. I don't need help. I can just live by myself on top of a mountain. And I've also never felt deeply close to my mom, right? There was a rupture in our attachment in those first few days because I felt she was not there for me, right? Now, if that is something that your listeners have gone through, I want them to know that both our children and ourselves, we can heal from that, right? Absolutely. We don't need to. My mom didn't have this information, 35 years ago to help me heal from it, and she's done the best she could. We do have some information now, and there are some awesome play therapists out there for kids that can help. And also, if the mother is doing her own somatic work, then she can help her child going through that same type of healing, right? So there is, it doesn't mean that they're going to be affected for the rest of their life, right?
No, and I think that's worth naming up as we know now how important that baby straight on mum is, and being rooming in and doing all that. But it wasn't, I mean, even in the 90s, babies still went off into their little wheelie room with all the other babies.
Yeah.
And that was just and we washed them straight away because they're filthy. And like, it's not that long ago. So it is a collective thing that we all have. But yes, definitely, I think it's worth saying from that experience we learn and we grow. And it's just okay, that's something to think about. That's something to be mindful of. That's part of our story.
That's right. That's right. And we can heal from it. Yeah.
What else is coming up for you that you think might be useful for people who are sitting there either with thinking about interacting with their children, thinking about maybe looking at some somatic experiencing work themselves?
I'm thinking of in the work when we're healing from birth trauma, one of the most important things is to recover a sense of healthy boundaries, right? Because that's a big thing when because giving birth is not traumatic in itself. It's not meant to be traumatic, right? We are made to give birth as women. We've done that for thousands of years, right? But it does become traumatic when people are involved and not respecting our boundaries and our timing, right? And as I said, that movement of pushing away is a huge part of the work. Helping the client, and I always tell them, we can't change the past. We can't. What has happened, but we can help the nervous system complete what was left incomplete and repair the boundaries that have been ruptured, right? So that's a very, very beautiful work, and it's very empowering as well, because the mother can finally, kick those doctors away, in her image of the birth. She can have who she wants in the space. She can verbalize what she had to keep inside because she didn't want to upset anyone, or she couldn't talk. A body can do the pushing away movement that it had to keep contained all this time. And that's very empowering, because like, wow, now this is me, this is my body, and I can name what I want and what I don't want. And when we prepare for another birth, if we want to have another child, that's something very important, to have this sense of empowerment and be able to talk out for ourselves. And as we're talking about the getting ready for the next birth, I think it's very important for us as women to come back to the wisdom of our body, because we know how to give birth, right? We are made to give birth. We know how to do this, and we can be one with our body. And that lovely mamas that gave me permission to share a bit of her story went through that, right? She went from a very traumatic birth to healing through somatic experiencing with me. And she came back to her body at a degree that was really, it was so beautiful. I remember her telling me, she had a baby just a month and a half ago, a second baby. And telling me, I was in my body. I could feel my cervix open. I didn't need anyone to touch or to check. I knew how it was open. Then I could feel the head of my baby coming out, but I knew it was not time to push yet. My body was not ready, and I've just trusted it and went with it. And then it just happened, and the surge of pushing came. But she was very attuned to her body. She had reconnect with her genitals, with her womb. She had taken the time to connect with her baby, and she went through that birth very empowered, to the point that she decided to free birth her baby. And that's just her and her husband and her little boy, who's 4 years old. They were both there with her. And that was absolutely beautiful. So I want, all the mamas out there, that it is possible to heal and to have a great birth too.
It has to be. I always think we have to go for the next bit of growth and hope and strength finding. Otherwise, we are just going to get stuck in this cultural thing that we are stuck in at the moment, where birth is just expected to be horrible.
Well, it doesn't need to be.
No. And I think even the sort of, broader experience of when it is not as was wanted for people, sometimes it falls on the, well, what did you expect? This is kind of just what happens. So there's so much of I think for our children and their children and whoever's children, that's part of the story too, that we change it from, oh my God, this awful thing happened, to, yes, it happened, and here's what I did with it.
That's right.
So powerful.
Yeah.
What about for someone who might still be stuck in the freeze, I hear what you're saying, but I feel numb, I've got nothing, who maybe is wanting to start reconnecting with some of these bodily things, but is just so frozen, I suppose, because that's something I think I see a bit with people who want to get to that next bit, but then it's almost like there's the veil of, I almost don't want to even pull the veil down because I'm afraid of how intense it's going to be.
Yeah.
What suggestions have you got for people who are maybe gently wanting to try and get themselves out of that frozen, numb, nothingness state?
And it's important, as you said, to know that there is a lot under the freeze, right? And they can feel that, and it does feel scary, and something that we are trained in somatic experiencing is called titration. And titration means drop by drop, little by little. Like if you were to mix two chemicals, if you were to pour one chemical into the other one all at once, it would explode. But if you are to put just one tiny drop at a time of one chemical into the other, then the reactions are very tiny, and little by little they mix together, right? And we call that titration, and it's our role as therapists to make sure that our client is never overwhelmed. Right? We don't go into the overwhelm. We don't even go into the story very much, because that itself can be quite overwhelming, right? To talk again about it, about what has happened. So that's something that is really reassuring for people to know, that, you know, it is our role as therapists to make sure they're never overwhelmed. And we always create the ground before we do any trauma healing work. So for the client to know that, oh yeah, I can deal with that amount of activation in my body, and I know to self-regulate again, right? And little by little, the body's capacity to handle activation becomes bigger and bigger and bigger, so that all the things that are inside under the freeze, little by little, get resolved without ever being overwhelmed, because we're only inviting up what the body can tolerate, what the person can tolerate, right? So it is a very gentle modality, and it's also very powerful, right? Because we're working with the cells, with the deep core of the trauma.
Okay. And what about for I always like to ask this question for people when it just comes up so much, and yet people are like, oh, I don't want to touch that, I don't want to think. What about the rage, like the pure hinged, just so much postpartum rage? Because I just know this is the thing that people don't like talking about, or they want to talk about it, but they just, so on someone else's behalf who is maybe just losing their shit every day, every hour at the moment, what have you got tucked away in your tool belt for rage, like the white hot, ugly, shameful, guilt-ridden, the really
Yes. Well, again, we go little by little, right? Rage is a powerful emotion, and I think as we are relearning to be in tune with our body, we are learning how everything that our body is bringing up, it's doing it in order to protect us. Right? So if there is rage there in the body, it's because something was done that didn't feel right at all. Right? And that's something that we need to acknowledge. Instead of fighting against the rage, it's like, oh wow, I'm feeling that because my body is trying to protect me. Right? And what we're learning with the somatic work is to be able to be with the sensations of the anger, right? Because emotions are basically just sensations in the body, right? So we are learning to just be with them without dissociating, without losing it. And we start with a tiny amount, with just a little bit of irritation, and see what happens in our body when we when we're feeling this irritation. And then we realize, wow, I didn't explode. I'm still whole. I can handle irritation. Great. What about we do a little bit more, right? A little bit more, so that we can stay embodied when we're feeling angry or when we're feeling rage without losing it. And we also give tools to our clients, how they can express their anger or their rage in a non-hurtful way, just like animals, right? Because we are animals inside. We've got the same nervous system as mammals, right? So the growling, the scratching, the squeezing something, right? All that is very healthy for us to express rage or anger, right? So again, little by little, and feeling it as an ally rather than a something we need to fight against or be ashamed of. Just noticing, wow, I'm really angry now. Okay, something might have happened, and then we provide our clients with tools so that they can handle it in a way that is not, hurting anyone.
And I think more conversations about that, the better, really. And I think that's always the one that people get stuck on. Tears are more socially acceptable, being anxious is more socially acceptable, grief being numb, but the anger is the one that often I think people really struggle to.
I know, because we are confused in our society between healthy anger and violence or crime. Right?
I think
They're
so too.
two very different things. The healthy anger is there in our body to tell us, hey, watch out, something is happening that is not right. My boundaries are not respected, or my needs are not met. When our boundaries are not respected or our needs are not met, our body goes into an anger reaction as a way to tell us, hey, that's not right, right? It's the mama bear within us that is saying, rah, that's not good, right? And this is very healthy, right? And we want to learn how to reconnect with that inner mama bear within us and befriend her, because that's the healthy anger. This is what is keeping us safe. This is what has kept us alive as a species for thousands of years.
So it's definitely worth thinking, I think, about the whole, well, it's not a think, it's a feel, about the whole picture. So everything that might have come up in the birth. I think also, because we haven't touched on that much, but it's worth adding for partners. Partners are sometimes the people who feel intense rage, because, as I always say to people, in what other circumstance would it ever be socially normal to watch your partner being held down, cut, handled roughly,
naked,
all of that, and then every part of your instinct wants to act, but we don't.
Absolutely.
And so it just gets stuck and it doesn't go anywhere. So I think that's
right. That's the fight response, right? That their body wanted to fight, wanted to defend their lady, right? But they did not, because it's not socially acceptable, because they trusted the doctors were doing the right thing, right? But inside their animal self, right, the tiger that is inside of them wanted to protect. It has mobilized the fight response, right? And that fight response could not complete. It didn't get anywhere. Right? So it's still within themselves, and that's what anger is, right? Chronic anger is that fight, always trying to complete. The body wants to complete it to come back to homeostasis, and that's what something we do in our session, is to help the system complete that fight response so that it can come back to a I don't need to defend her anymore. I've done it now. It's very powerful. Yeah.
So it's definitely worth thinking about for people listening, whether it might not be, because this is another common thing, even if it wasn't you who went through the birth yourself, being in that space, whether you are the partner, a midwife, a student in the corner, whoever it might be, a lot of that gets absorbed, and it's very easy to just go, oh, well, sort of, it wasn't my birth, it wasn't me, I wasn't the one going through it, it's not that bad. Like, the vicarious aspect, I think, is really worth having more discussions about too, so that people really do understand that it's not just the person who went through the birth and the baby, it's everybody in that bubble, and birth is a bubble.
Yeah, absolutely.